All right, George Hurd. Pleasure, to have you here now in my little studio office space. And I can't even remember when we met. Was it like 3 years ago by now? Probably.
Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago. Yeah, something to that effect. It was no, wait, no, it was the winter of 2021.
Okay, so
Was
4 years,
Yeah, fuck,
over four
that's right.
years.
Yeah, that was a random encounter. I remember standing in the rain waiting for Glenn Cornett,
Yeah.
the the New York music mogul, to come out and meet me. And he was inside this restaurant with some random people I didn't know. And I'm standing outside, getting soaking wet, being like, "Come on, Glenn, let's do this." And after a while, I was just like, "All right, that's it." I go inside, and it was you and your wife and your daughter, and we met each other. I didn't realize that you guys were such new transplants to Berlin, just like us. And
Yes.
it was nice to meet somebody that you have something in common with. It's always nice having a mutual friend who can vouch for the other. Like, this person's cool. You should hang out. I'm like, okay. And now fast forward, and our wives are friends, and your daughter and my son are buddies. And yeah, this worked out well. But yeah, thanks for having me, by the way.
Yeah. So I was obviously very happy and just also very interested in you because Glenn introduced you to me as a composer, as a musician slash composer. And so, George, tell me or tell us now a little bit about what you do and how you came to be a musician.
Yeah, well, what I do basically is, I would say what I do is electro-acoustic music. So combining acoustic instruments, largely classical instruments, but really, let's just say acoustic instruments in general, with electronic forces in general. It's what that means. Electronics is a super vague term, but really anything in the medium of synthesizers, samplers. I've dabbled in modular synths a good amount and a lot of electronic processing. But mainly what I've focused on over the years is writing for classical musicians and ensembles, including my own, the Hurd Ensemble that I've had for many years, and combining that with a huge variety of these kind of electronic media.
So you're doing that both in the studio and live, right? Like you just described.
Yeah, and over the past couple of years, I've done it a lot less live with an ensemble, I should say, and it's become much more studio heavy. When I perform live these days, I tend to do it as a solo act, so it's much more heavily electronic. But the source material that I draw from, sampled material and otherwise, is all coming from this sound world that I've collected over the years and that I continue to record with people that I'm friends with and artists that I meet. Um, and I kind of just try to, as organically as possible, meld these two worlds together. But yeah, the electronic thing, I think from living in Berlin, electronics has become much more a part of what I do and how I think about music. And also, truthfully, the pandemic had a big part of it to do with that because suddenly I couldn't make music with people. I'm relying on machines more and more and more, and I just got lost in that world. But I enjoy the hell out of it, so it's still a lot of fun.
Like Berlin and electronic music is so very, those two worlds have a tight bond,
Oh yeah,
you know?
very much so.
And going back to the early 70s even, and then techno music in Berlin. And it's kind of funny because as you were talking right now, I was just thinking that there actually maybe Berlin may actually make people make electronic music.
Oh yeah,
Oh
definitely,
yeah, I mean,
100%.
why?
I mean, for me, I mean, so there's a lot of different ways to approach that. The answer is yes, totally. But I think that for me coming here, it has been difficult for me to find, for instance, classical musicians to work with. All the people that I happen to be friends with come from this experimental electronic world. Most of them, so I'm friends with, I'm sure your listeners probably know who Heinbach is. And, he's been very nice to introduce me to people. And every single person, I'm like, so do you know of a harpist or do you know of a violinist? And the answer was a resounding no. And they all make incredible and brilliant experimental electronic music. And so you do feel at home in that world, and you end up, getting sucked into that hole. But also, I mean, it was part of what drew me here was that I just love the focus on electronics and the respect given to this medium. Coming from, so I lived in San Francisco my whole adult life before I moved here, and electronic music was relegated to this essentially dance music only world. And you could find some small pockets of experimental, noisemakers and things like that. But there wasn't any kind of, certainly not a premier place to present your music that wasn't in the vein of just dance music. And I don't, I mean, I'm sure I've made some stuff that people, will get some people moving on occasion, but that is not the focus of my music and not the world I want to be associated with necessarily, even though that's great. But it is, this town is just synonymous with electronic music, and coming to a place where you can perform a show and people will give the same amount of respect to electronics as they would classical musicians or jazz musicians who are up there doing their thing. That's very special, and I had not encountered that before, other than some very specific situations in the States. I'd not encountered that before I moved here.
Yeah, that's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the music in general, and this is kind of interesting. I would say is very respected here, but not in an elitist way.
Right.
And so, yeah, interesting. And I was just thinking, like in the techno music of the '80s that started here in Berlin. I know it wasn't only Berlin where it started,
Sure.
but there was sort of like part of it was that it was affordable in the sense that like the boxes you needed were kind of affordable, and it was possible to have like a really small space
Yeah.
and with headphones, or just a couple of speakers to start making music rather than having to have a rehearsal space where your ensemble comes together and,
Yep.
so there's something really very homegrown and sort of like I would even say working class,
Yes.
at least in Germany, about electronic music.
100%.
Yeah.
There is a thing, I'm still coming to terms with all this, but I do feel like the aims of American musicians can be a little bit grander sometimes, unrealistic, one would say, but where like the homegrown aspect of things is not done as often. And here, a lot of the people I meet who are even people who are quite successful, like they still have a very reasonable take on being an artist and knowing how to build their own space in with limited resources, and still making incredible art. And for me, that was a big part of it too, was the affordability. Coming from San Francisco, it was just a sinking ship. And I adore San Francisco. I love that city so much. I'm not one of these people who's thinking that it's, on fire and that the homeless are taking over the city and whatever, and whatever people say. I still understand that it is an incredible place, but economically it is completely fucked. And to be an artist of any sort there, even a successful artist, it is extremely difficult. And when I was living there, years before I moved, I remember taking a walk with it's my wife now, my then girlfriend. And we're walking through Upper Haight. Like a lot of people know Haight Ashbury. It was this neighborhood right above there that we lived. And we're walking around, and there's massive, massive, gorgeous houses. These old Victorian houses. And after living there for about a year, we started to realize, like, oh, we thought this was an apartment building. And you realize there is a single woman who lives in this gigantic mansion, or maybe a small family. And by the way, they're mostly empty all year because they're off doing God knows what. But as we're walking around looking at these houses and just kind of reveling in the beauty of the city, because it's gorgeous there, we started to say things like, maybe I should just get a job in, tech, and maybe I should just do this instead. And we suddenly caught ourselves and realized, what are we doing? Like, we were ready to completely shift the focus of our lives just so that we could afford to live in this place that, while we did love it, it would be making a sacrifice that I think would be unthinkable. And so Berlin is definitely getting expensive, don't get me wrong. It's not as cheap as it used to be by any means, but it's still incredibly affordable compared to most cities I've ever lived in. Before we decided to move here, actually, we went everywhere. We went to every major American city that we really liked. I mean, New York, Los Angeles, Portland, Chicago, and we were all over the place. And we looked at places around Europe and Barcelona. This is over, by the way, many years. It wasn't like we took this massive tour, this endless vacation, but Lisbon and Barcelona and London and just all over the place. And Berlin was the consistently the only place that felt right. I think artistically, the way that there's an anything goes mentality here. Truly, I feel like you can be as expressive as you want to be without any restrictions. There's real support for the art, for the arts in general, both financially and just kind of, you just emotionally, like you feel like I can do this. Like there are people who believe in what you do and all that. But then you could, the apartment that I have at the moment is, if you were to transplant that to San Francisco, you would have to be incredibly wealthy to have. And it's not that great of an apartment. But just to show you what it's like there, like the place I lived at before I moved to Berlin was, I mean, I couldn't live in a place like that again. It was so small. It used to be an office space, so it had this like indoor outdoor carpeting just permanently installed in the floor. There were fluorescent lights in the ceiling in our bedroom I mean, it was just so weird. But it was the only thing that we could find that wasn't outrageously expensive. And so here it all feels doable. But I will say, to your point earlier, having a studio in my apartment where, it's a fairly modest setup, but I'm able to produce everything that I need to. But now that I am getting my ensemble up and running here in Berlin, I think it should be fine to rehearse in my apartment, but I don't know. So let's have another conversation in a few months when I get all the musicians together, because that will be very interesting to see how that plays out. Because having a separate rehearsal space in any city is difficult. But either way, that being said, Berlin has been the right choice up and down since I moved here. I'm so happy that I ended up here.
So tell me about the history of how. Let's really start at the beginning. So when did you have a musical education? What was it like? Were you ever a player yourself? Or would you say that you were like you're a composer first? Because that's what I would actually say
Sure.
for myself. How did that happen? And at which age did you feel the urge and the drive to make music?
Yeah, I mean, so I did not grow up in a musical or artistic household. My parents were very working class, great people. They always listened to a significant variety of music. My mother was very much into, doo-wop and a lot of music from like the 60s and the 50s. My dad as well. But my father, he used to listen to opera, and he was obsessed with Viennese waltzes growing up. I think it was from his mother. But there was always interesting different types of music playing, but I never got any support to play music or anything like that. Nor, I'll be honest with you, I didn't really show that much of an inclination to want to play. Honestly, if I thought about this recently, like my first musical memory, if you want to call it that, is we had an old upright piano in our house for a number of years, and nobody was using it. We took some piano lessons, but me and my two sisters, we were all not that interested in it. It didn't sound great. And my first musical memory really was my father and I smashing the piano with sledgehammers and destroying it so we could throw it away. Which now I'm just heartbroken by the notion of doing that. But I mean, it was almost unusable as piano. I don't really blame him, but I really feel like that had an effect on me. The sound of destroying a piano is fucking incredible. There's actually a composer in the Bay Area, Mos Dayano, who he was involved with the Sleepy Gorilla Museum and all that.
Yeah, I know him.
He's got a piece for, I think it's called The Death of a Piano or something like that. And it's him violently destroying a piano over like 20 minutes. And it feels like sacrilege and also the most incredible thing you've ever seen. There's a how dare you quality to it, but also like you can't turn away. It's incredible. But yeah, so you fast forward, and I think I asked for my first guitar when, let's say, I'm not exactly sure what age. I want to say 10, or no, maybe it was 12 years old, somewhere in that 10 to 12. I got an electric guitar, very basic thing, and I just started getting into like standard, Nirvana, Weezer, like all these different things, and then in high school, and I kept playing for years, but wasn't really into that remarkable music. And then in high school, I met the friends that would end up being my friends for the rest of my life, and we all started playing music together, and that's when I got into drums and just percussion in general, and that I just continued to run with for years. But a very close friend of mine gave me a cracked version of FL Studio, of Fruity Loops, back when I was just starting high school, and that totally blew me away. Suddenly, like I had been trying to record music of my own. Like that's where I think there was answering your question. Like this is where the composer part really showed itself. Was I found myself when I was thinking about music to write in a band, I couldn't decide what instrument I really wanted to play. Like I found myself in my imaginings of it that I'm, playing the guitar in this part and then the drums in this part, and it wasn't like I want to be the front man for everything. It was more just I just kind of wanted to do all of it, and also making music with people who maybe aren't perfect for you to make music. We maybe I'm not on the same page. I played a lot of metal and punk and things like that back in the day, which some of it is great, but I'm not interested in making that music anymore. But so suddenly with this introduction of, the electronic music and getting my first DAW, the possibilities were literally limitless. Other than what a computer could do back in the day, that was pretty limited actually. But so I just dove into that and just got really obsessively into it. And I mean, I have hundreds and hundreds of pieces of music that are still stored on my computer that I'd never released or did anything with. That was just from, you know, I'd say 5 to 10 years of just experimenting. Yeah, and that was
Was there a music program in in your school?
no. Well, I know there was, but it was marching band, which is just no offense to anybody who does that, or it's just god awful. It's truly the devil's music. It's the worst thing I've ever heard. These poor kids are subjected to really. It's the worst possible music you can find to play. A lot of patriotic songs and these just bastardized versions of standards and things like that. Occasionally they'd throw in a jazz number that was somewhat respectable, but it was still terrible. But there was no strings. It was just wind instruments and like one percussionist playing the snare drum. So that never really struck me. I think that had they had an orchestra.
Did you learn to read music?
No, I taught myself how to read music in college. So yes, I went to university in Chicago and I studied writing, and I did that for years after school. After I got out of college, where I used to write for magazines and I wrote travel guides and things like that. I quickly realized that was not the career for me. But I would spend, while I was in university, I would spend every day a couple of hours in the music library, just like studying scores, like Bartok scores in particular. I was just obsessed with, and Stravinsky and Art Peart and all these different things. And I just really, really got into the technique of composing, of in particular not just composing from like a purely musical standpoint, but to the essence of putting things to paper, of recording on paper music that I had written. And I just kept going with that. And so I taught myself how to read music at that point, and I studied viola, and I studied marimba, and formally studied these. But I was in the meantime like learning a ton of percussion. I was obsessed with Middle Eastern and Brazilian percussion instruments in particular. And so I just really went down this rabbit hole of like all this obscure music. And
I think that's really, really interesting that you basically, without having acquired, let's say, what people would probably see as the basics as a child, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So you didn't have that, but you still dove into all that at a later age.
Yeah.
It's great. I mean, I think there's something interesting for that because and like you know what it's like to have a child, right?
Yeah.
So in a way, to just allow the child to be a child, even through the teenage years.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sure. I mean,
It's
I
just,
don't know what it's like to have a teenager yet. I'm nervous.
yeah, I know.
But
But I remember what it was like for me,
Oh,
and like I was,
that was awful.
yeah. But also like in terms of you know, I already, you know, as a 6-year-old learned to read music. And I'm just kind of like I think it really kind of pushed me into a certain direction,
Yeah.
and that if I had been freer in listening and like working with my own tools for like creating sound worlds within my head without having like reference points, like you know how to
Yeah.
write music down, I think I would have gone in a completely direction
Yeah.
with my taste and with my
That is,
yeah.
I mean, 100%. And actually, there was a moment where I was trying to decide. I had been in university for about 2 years, and I was trying to decide. I'm like, okay, I know that I don't necessarily want to. I always enjoyed writing, but I wasn't into journalism, and I didn't have the burning fire to be an author or anything like that. And so I knew that I wanted to be a composer and I wanted to be a musician, but I was like, but do I switch my major and become a music major? And I was really kind of debating with this and hemming and hawing. And then I heard or I read an interview with John McEntire, the drummer from Tortoise, who is like one of my favorite drummers of all time. Incredible. And he had gone to school for music, for percussion, I'm pretty sure. And it's incredible technical skill and everything. But he said in an interview, he's like, "I wish that I had not." I'm wildly paraphrasing. It's been like 20 years since I read this thing, but where he had gone to school for music, and he essentially wished that he hadn't, and he was discouraging people from going to school and studying music because he felt that it kind of pigeonholed you. You were forced into this area of this is what you write, this is how you play, this is right, this is wrong. And it would otherwise discourage people who might have a very individual voice
Yeah.
from ever finding that. And I personally met a lot of people, especially having worked in classical music for so many years, met people who were incredible musicians, but they mentally couldn't allow themselves to break out of this mold. Where they and one musician who he had gone to Juilliard, he was in my ensemble for years, and I was talking with him about changing what he was doing a little bit, and it was something as simple as movement on stage because he was stiff as a board, it was like this weird voodoo stare and this rigid posture. And I was like, hey man, maybe try moving around a little bit. Like you seem uncomfortable. And he's like, George, I have been taught from the youngest age, this is how you stand, this is how you sit, this is how your posture is, this is how every body part moves, this is how you do it. And to do anything less than that is unacceptable. He said, every day since then, I have been trying to unlearn what they taught me, and I can't. And at the time, he was like in his early 30s. And so, yeah, for me, I never really felt too much of that draw. I know that I would have learned a lot that I still don't know about composition just because of the resources involved, like being able to like write me a cantata or whatever. I'm like, I'm not doing that on my own. But if you have a class where you have to do that, and then they're going to play it, we have an orchestra who's going to play your piece at the end of the like, I would have learned a lot from that. But I was instead obsessed with just completely open-ended sonic exploration via electronics. Um, and yeah, subsequently, a lot of the classical music, if you want to call it that, that I got into, especially early on, was doing the same thing, just with acoustic forces. Like Penderecki, his early stuff, his like super experimental stuff from the '60s and all that. Ligeti, all these people, actually, a lot of Polish composers, Ludosławski and people like that, where there was just this. I mean, I'd never heard anything like that, like acoustically or electronically, sonically. Period. I've never heard anything like that, and that's always what I wanted from anything that I listened to, and certainly anything that I wrote. But in the classical world, as far as study was concerned, that was not an option from what I could see. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this on my own. And so, yeah, so I just taught myself everything. And you can, for anybody who's like debating this and like feels that they have to go to school in order to compose, you absolutely do not. There are pros and there are cons, don't get me wrong, but you can teach yourself anything if you really apply yourself. Because most people, it just takes a lot of, I wouldn't say, I was going to say discipline, but I'm like, I'm the least disciplined person in the world. I'm just kind of obsessed. I think that's, and I think you would probably understand that. It takes a lot of hard work, but you have to just be obsessed with what you do and just endlessly keep going at it because you just have to, you know? So
Yeah,
here we are.
I find it fascinating that you, on top of just teaching yourself this stuff, let's say, that you went way beyond the, let's say, the writing of the material, let's say, but that you also put together an ensemble to play it. So there's sort of like, it's an extension that goes into like traditionally you would have performers performing your piece, and ideally as a composer you wouldn't have any responsibility
Yeah.
for the ensemble.
No, that would be nice.
But if you obviously, if you, and for me it was kind of similar, but it was sort of like that I realized if I want to hear the things that I'm creating, I have to play them myself.
Yeah. Exactly.
But then like what you did to create an extension of yourself, let's say, which is the ensemble.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I mean, how old were you when you started that?
25.
Wow.
And so I moved to San Francisco and immediately via Craigslist just started posting things about looking for a violinist, looking for so originally I went with violin, viola, cello, double bass, piano, and then vibes, and eventually harp and bass clarinet. Such an impractical group of musicians. Like a smarter person would have been like, let's start with the string quartet where I can get other people to play it who aren't my musicians later. But I was like, nope, how about an ensemble that doesn't exist in any shape or form outside of this room? But I had stumbled upon that because I had written a film score back when I was living in Chicago. Daniel Alexander is this director that I met who hired me to write the music to this film, this heartbreaking film about a man who was falsely accused of and ultimately imprisoned for 20 years. And anyways, they sat me down and they're like, what kind of instrumentation do you want? We were going to do like a really great recording session and they had a budget. And so I kind of sat down and we went through a lot of different sketches and I fell upon this set of instruments that was just kind of perfect, this kind of ultimately very graceful, kind of soft quality that it was capable of producing, but also that had the ability to be aggressive and rhythmic when needed as well. And so I was just kind of obsessed with this combination. And when I literally like within a week or two of moving to San Francisco, I started finding people. And it's like one thing, like you find one person and then they're like, oh, you should meet this person. And quickly you're able to get to be part of the scene. But as far as, it being, you know, you know, it's a difficult thing to do, but I think a lot of it came down to maybe just ignorance on my part of how hard that is to accomplish. Because for me, I had never worked with a classical ensemble before before I did the film score, which was right before I moved to San Francisco. And I remember the first moment that I stood in front of them for a rehearsal, and I'm like, oh shit, I don't know what I'm doing. And it just suddenly hit me. And like, I don't know how to conduct. I'm not a band leader. I've worked with musicians many times, but it's a different set. Like the classical ensemble will just sit quietly and be like, what do we do? Exactly. And whereas in a band, you're like, okay, like, and you just start throwing out ideas and you work together. This was like, I have the music, I'm here at time. What's the downbeat? And I say it was suddenly everything came crashing down. I'm like, oh shit, I have a lot to learn still. And so over the next couple,
But it happens by creating, you created those situations for yourself to learn.
yeah, high stress situations.
Yeah.
I mean, looking back, I'm like, I was fine, but really it was. And the thing is, we were able to get incredible musicians from the Chicago scene, people who were like playing with, the Chicago Symphony and the opera. I was really like out of my depth at first, but they were amazing people and they did an incredible job. And but so when I moved and started my own ensemble in San Francisco, I had a better idea of how to do this. And one of the things that I've learned about, especially classical musicians, is that it can be daunting to work with them because they're very academic and they have a language to communicate music that, you know, is very esoteric. And but they want to make music that isn't just Mozart for the most part. There are some of those people, and I think they're like aliens. I don't understand that at all. Just wanting to play the same type of ancient music over and over again. But most of them, they just want to get involved in something new because they play a lot of church services and weddings and things to pay the bill, to pay the bills. And so when something new comes along, especially if they think it's, you know, worth a damn and interesting, they're excited to just try something new. And so it turned out to be more of a band vibe ultimately. Like I was in control. I was the director. I put conducting in quotes for this because it's not real conducting, but just really band leading. But we were in it together. It was a nice vibe, and they ultimately ended up being, you know, my friends forever as well. So, but yeah, like I am re-experiencing all that, moving to Berlin and starting a new group, because also it's different as you get older too, where, you know, I'm not like hanging out at shows as often. I have a kid and I don't have as many free evenings as I would have in the past. And so I'm slowly getting into the scene in Berlin and finding some great people. But yeah, that's the hard part of being a composer, I would say, is either assembling a group of your own if you're willing to do that, or finding an existing ensemble who's willing to support your music. Both are great. Both have pros and cons, but it's not easy at the beginning, at least.
So, as the, let's just call it band leader or ensemble leader, and the person writing the material, how, like, I'm really asking because I have never been in a situation like this. So let's say it's partly band, it's partly a band, it's partly an external ensemble in a sense, right? And but you're bringing in the composition. So have you been like self-conscious about what you were writing
Oh, hell
in the
yes.
light of what they would say or think or feel or
Oh yeah. Especially that's the thing. It depends on the musician. There are a lot of stuck-up musicians and artists all over the world. But I think occasionally I would run into somebody who was, I'm not going to use the term diva to describe them, but somebody who is very aware of their abilities, whether or not that's founded or not, and they can be judgmental in the moment. I've definitely encountered that, and I've butted heads with people where I'm like, what are you doing here? If you just come to rehearsal with an attitude, I feel like we don't need to do this. Like, I want to do this together with people where we feel like we are making music as a single unit on stage, like trying to share this experience rather than, you know, I totally, you got to make a living and there's money gigs, and I've hired people for just one-off like substitution roles and things like that. But in general, I try to avoid anybody who's going to be toxic in their kind of presentation or the ways they receive any of the work I do. But for the most part, everybody I've worked with has been super cool. I think when it's people that you don't know, if it's an ensemble, especially a well-known ensemble, there's always that. I mean, these are new people. You're going into a room and you have to develop a rapport, and you know, it's the same as like sitting across the table from somebody. If you know, sit down cold with somebody you've never met before, it takes a little while to get the gears moving and to develop this rapport. And so with a lot of people, you just have to kind of break the ice, you know, get everybody loosened up and comfortable with you, and show that they're in good hands and that you're worth a damn. And if you can just get through that initial awkwardness, it's almost always an amazing experience. I've never had a nightmarish experience. Let's put it that way. In fact, I mean, quite the opposite. I mean, the group that I've worked with somewhat recently is Third Coast Percussion, based in Chicago, and these are, I mean, like top of their field. I don't even know how many Grammys they've won. Like I want to say 7, but it might be more. It's ridiculous, and they are the nicest group of guys I've ever met. Like super open-minded, very like sweet and approachable. I remember we were in a rehearsal one time. They commissioned a piece for me to write, and I was already living in Germany and they're in Chicago, and so we're doing this like Zoom rehearsal or workshop. And at one point, I was like, I'm thinking about how about we get some metal like mixing bowls and fill them with super balls, and then we can mic them and roll them around, like stir them around inside on both sides of the stage, and how seriously they took that. It resulted in this 20-minute discussion of, what quality of Super Bowl and how quickly to move it, and would this work better? And oh, I think I have a bowl that's great. And they disappear, and you hear, and they're going through all their massive collections of instruments, and they come back and they're just on board. They're game for whatever. And other people don't have that same kind of vibe. These are just really, really good guys. But I think for the most part, trying to navigate your musical life to work with the best people possible it's the same thing, I think, as like trying to not spend your time around toxic people in your personal life. Like as much as you can, try to avoid the negativity. And most people are just, I mean, we're all artists. We're all here for a reason. And I think that only a handful of people that I've met have been too jaded to work with. Let's put it that way. But yeah.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. So maybe the one about recording first. So I don't actually know how much of the Hurd Ensemble or how much of that material was actually recorded.
Sure. Yeah.
But can you tell me a little bit about your experience? Like, in how far did you have to become also an engineer, let's say?
Oh yeah.
Because that's what it sounded like to me, that you would also be setting up the mics and capturing, or like, because that would be like more my approach. I like to outsource that kind of work.
Oh yeah.
Like, so what kind of experience did you have over the years
So
recording?
yeah, I mean that's a good point. I mean,
Especially because it's electro-acoustic, right? So you
yeah.
have to have somebody who accepts the electronic side.
Yes.
If it's a classical engineer you're working with.
I have had really good luck with the engineers. I mean, for the most part, I mean, I guess there was one experience. I'm not going to name anybody, but there was one experience with somebody who was still a student at a prominent university in the States, who was just inexperienced. That was a little bit rough, but I'm consistently impressed at how well engineers are able to follow a score and just like get their head around a piece of music. And but I put myself in their hands for everything technical. Like I do not know what the best mic is to use for this double bass, or I mean, on any level. Like I'm like, you're the expert. There's been some that were better than others, but really I try to let them, they are experts in their field. But then it takes a ton of prep on my end, because what I have to do for the recording is solidify the electronic end of things so that I can just give a backing track to an engineer that can be, usually as often as possible, can be played to a click, because then they can follow the score, and it just makes the whole process of recording much easier. I have done everybody in a room all recording at once, and it's great to have that live feel. But when it's a large ensemble, especially if you haven't rehearsed much at all, which was the case for this particular project that I'm talking about, it just becomes very messy, and there's nothing you can do about it. Like if one person flubs their part, it's in everybody's
Yeah,
recording.
yeah.
So I've tried to just do track by track or section by section as much as I can, or isolate people so they can record at the same time. But if somebody messes up, we don't have to redo everything.
Interesting, because that already answers what would have been my next question. So, but I mean, like, which was like, do you prefer live recording versus multi-track recording, let's say? And also, like, do you like the studio experience better than like the live recording experience? Like for me, I don't have a favorite way. It always depends on the project.
I'll be honest with you. I think I've gotten more into the studio experience. Not that I don't love the live experience of it, but given the type of music that I write, it is some of the pieces that I've written more recently have required that a person be like playing to not just a click, but being cued somehow in a way that in concert will be very hard to keep them in the right place.
Yeah.
And you know, especially as maybe it's me getting older, maybe it's me getting more involved with electronic music and all this, but I've gotten more into something closer to, you know, ambient music, just, you know, rhythmicless, beatless electronic music that's more textural. But when I, you know, in that field of music, keeping a person who has even a somewhat intricate part, you know, be it a, you know, somebody playing flute or a string instrument or something, keeping them where they need to be is very difficult because all of my music is it's intricate. Even the stuff that seems kind of slow and, you know, a little bit more drawn out and even like amorphous at times is very, very, you know, composed to every specific moment. And this has to build to exactly this point and everything else has to be triggered at that point. And people are coming in and out in a way that is not obvious that it's, you know, to a click or something, but it all has to be done just so. I don't write every piece of music like that, but I do enjoy writing that because I think it's probably true of a lot of composers. I'm a bit of a control freak. And so having control over all those different aspects, like the minutia of music, is something I love to do. Like if I showed you the automation on one of the projects, you'd be like, you have a problem. Like, it's so insane, the amount of like just tiny little, let's just do this and move this. And I'll just go on and on and on. I'm working on that, trying to chill out a little bit. But so the studio experience is very
I mean,
enjoyable.
in a way, that is what really, like, if you say you make electroacoustic or acoustic electro music, that's the way it is. Because, like, obviously, the electronic part, the recorded part, that's where you as a composer still have control over the composition. So it's more than, or that's a different approach than being just purely a writer who's writing for a string quartet. Then the
Right.
string quartet gets recorded, and you wouldn't want to touch a fader, let's say,
Sure.
at the end of, but you know, like what you do, what we do, is very different in that regard. That we, like my friend Pat Maslotto, who you know as well,
Sure.
right? He always used to say, "It's not done unless it's in the shrink wrap."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, you know, I also, it's interesting too. We had a talk about this the other day, actually, where it was about, you know, destination, like having a place for your music to go after you've written it and knowing that, like knowing that a piece of music will be played in a church in 2 months versus, oh, yeah, I'd like to write this piece that, oh, yeah, this would probably go well in a church, but I don't know. We'll see what happens with it. Those are two totally different mindsets, I think. And I do think that when I first started with my first iteration of the group in San Francisco, it was for concert, and everything had to be done so that you could hear the pulse throughout. And you know, when I say like conduct, I was just kind of cueing people and keeping them on track, especially if the meter gets a little bit odd at times. You know, just letting people know where the downbeat is, or you know, suddenly everything switches to 5 and there's a lot of people playing and everything, and you just need to keep everybody together until you get to this point, and then they're good. So everything had to be very much written so that it could be clear to everybody that this is where we're at. The pulse is always evident, and that's a very different experience than writing just for the studio. So I have one record that I did with this kind of live version of the Hurd Ensemble. It's called Navigation Without Numbers. It was on Innova Recordings. And I love it. It was great. I think it was well received. We got some good press on it, and people liked it. I played it all over the place. We did plenty of tours, Kennedy Center, played New York and LA and all this different stuff. But since I've moved here, I just have had a very different approach to music. I just, you know, I'm just developing, and I found that I've started writing things where it's not always as evident, you know, what is happening and when it's going to happen and when people are going to come. You can't just listen and know. You have to be led through, either by a click, or oftentimes I'll wear a click and then I'll just lead everybody through it. But I have a record. So I have two other Hurd Ensemble records that have not been released yet. One is called Echolocation, which is essentially done. That it does exactly that. It was so. Just a quick aside. It's a piece where every piece on the record is about a different location, and there's a lot of stuff that is different cities in Germany, different cities in Portugal, Italy, New Zealand, around in the States, of course, and Oslo, all this different stuff. And it just uses sounds that I collected in those places, sometimes random recordings that I did with musicians that I just happened upon or was connected to. And, but so I have two of these records that are coming out, and it's a very different vibe. Like, not like the other ones. Like I do think that they're often very rhythmic, which is kind of a hallmark of a lot of my music, is that it's intensely rhythmic. Not all of it, but with the Hurd Ensemble especially. But I just find myself wanting to get off the grid a little bit, kind of break that adherence to the grid, and not always be exactly to a pulse. But it's just difficult, and it takes a lot of forethought and preparation technically in order to make that happen. Getting people in and out of a click in a live setting is just an ass ache. But I'm getting better at it, and I think the music is getting better as a result.
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Like I recently played with a new group of people I had not played with before, and just realizing how differently I interpret the beat,
Yeah.
like coming from my bands, like so that there's like within the ensemble, there's such like even like within the ensemble, independently of the material that you're playing,
Right.
there's such a different way to interpret
Sure.
the pulse. And then like as you say, coming in and out of it is incredibly difficult because also the people need to be in sync for it to actually
Yeah.
work out. I'm fascinated by that. I think like the fact that you put yourself into the position to actually lead an ensemble is that is something that's sort of missing in my experience, and I'm really interested in that. Even though I think I can, in my touch guitar circle
Sure.
courses, I do that, but it's never just it's not musical work in that sense.
I think in your case, I think the truly difficult part is that you are like playing the whole time. Like seeing you on stage, and you are very, very involved in the music that is happening. Whereas for me, depending on the type of music that I'm doing, I am limited to being able to actually produce, like playing melodies, for instance, or, a lot of it is, me triggering music and manipulating the piece, the parts of the piece that are happening, and letting people know when to come in and out and dynamics and all this. But I'm so busy that I can't sit and like, I'm going to play a part along with you most of the time. There are moments for that, but for you, you would have to like put the guitar down and be like, all right, and you roll up your sleeves and really get into it. And it's a totally different form of music then.
It is, yeah.
I mean, it could be fun to try like mid piece to just break away and see how the music would differ. But you have to be interested in going down that path. And so for me, it's like anything. You end up, myself, I get bored after a few years of doing something, and you just want to try something new. And instead of having to feel the limitations of what you're able to accomplish given whatever group I'm working with or whatever the project is, I've been trying to figure out ways to be able to kind of do both and have everything. And like I said, it just requires a lot of planning and preparation, but it's doable, as long as you're really into it.
So obviously, like the first few years here in Berlin were difficult just because
Yeah.
of COVID
Yeah.
and also you being placed in a new culture where you don't speak German actively much, right?
It doesn't.
But you
sadly,
just
doesn't
said to
come
me
up,
you
though.
understand you do understand it.
Yeah.
And then kind of like wanting to put together a new group. How has that gone recently? Like you said, you have people now, right?
Yeah, it has not been an issue. This is the problem that many expats from all over the world encounter is that you don't, especially in Berlin, you don't have to speak German that often. And I don't mean like just refusing. I think that I don't want to be this, some ignorant guy who lives here for a decade and doesn't know how to speak any German. But at the same time, it doesn't come up. And a lot of the people that I meet are from all over the world. It's not just German musicians. Like there's just a huge pool of talent from really everywhere.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's actually not been a problem at all to at least from a language standpoint. But what I will say is that I do think that it has made it a much slower process of getting into like the scene,
Yeah.
because a lot of the way that I've built groups in the past is like when I lived in New York or when I lived in San Francisco or Chicago, is you just go out and hang. You go see a show, and then everybody's having drinks afterwards, and you go out somewhere, and then somebody, oh, I'm playing a show next week, you should come. And then you go to that, and then you meet all those musicians, and before you know it, you have this blossoming social circle of like-minded musicians. And that's fully possible here, but it is much smoother if you can obviously speak the language. So yeah, I'm in the process of learning, but it's a bitch of a language to learn. It
I
really
mean, like
is.
what I find interesting is that Berlin, even though it may not be a huge city, right, compared to other big cities in the world, but somehow in the cultural world, let's say, it feels like a huge city.
I mean,
Because there's so much going on.
yeah.
There's so many people, so that like the schmoozing aspect, let's say, like here is it's much harder to do because in a way, like like scenes are more concentrated, and at the same time more spread out. I don't know how to
Yeah,
explain it.
I hear you. Yeah. I think, well, there's always been, I think I'm a little bit used to that in a way because coming from, I was put into the new music scene, the unfortunately named new music scene,
Yeah.
because it's just kind of like experimental composition type stuff. And that is in every city I've been in, from New York to San Francisco, to here, it's always a very kind of small, select group of people who choose to go down this path, and it almost becomes incestuous in the way that they all hang out together, they all know each other, and even across oceans, you still are connected to those groups. So I'm pretty used to kind of finding my way into those circles and hopefully finding cool people. But you're right. And, truthfully, one of the things too is that there is so much going on in Berlin that I find myself getting almost annoyed because I don't have the time to see all this stuff. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go see, William Basinski, play, in a few weeks. And then suddenly you see the very next day, it's like, whoever, like your other favorite artist. And then a week later, there's this other thing. And then your buddy is playing here. And it quickly becomes a thing where I can't do all this, And so I start to resent how much is happening because I'm like, damn it, I want to see all of it. And so also, I think there's this thing too of I've spent a lot of time in my life, I'm sure most of us have, going to shows that you felt obligated to go to as opposed to being super excited. And so I'm a little bit jaded on that level where I'm like, I shouldn't just go to a show because I should. But here I'm finding that there's a lot of shows that I'm genuinely excited to go see. So I'm trying to take advantage of that as much as possible. But I think it's, my kid's still pretty young. And so it can be difficult, but I'm coming to a point where that's not a problem anymore. So I think it's just on me to get out there more and more and experience everything that this city has to offer, which is daunting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, and I don't think I ever told you before, but just like the idea to put together a group of people is something that is just really feels like too much to me. And
Yeah.
just thinking that you're coming, from a different cultural background, you don't have the context here yet, and you want to build that. And in a way, you have a history also. Like you have your own ensemble, which has had you name.
Yeah.
Right. So there's sort of like a discontinuity in your life because of the move, which is, and you already said that you know, like you started to make, you're doing solo performances now as well, and more electronic, obviously, for
Sure.
that matter. But still, I really admire you for keeping on to that vision to actually bring that ensemble back
Thank you.
in whatever form it may take. Yeah.
I appreciate that because I think on some level I'm a little bit just blind to the future difficulties of the things that I have goals related to. And, moving to a new country and learning the language and becoming part of, a scene and a culture and creating a group. It's basically starting a business. And, and trying to, by the way, this is the biggest part that I haven't touched on, and trying to populate that group with people that you genuinely like spending time with. I can't emphasize that enough to any aspiring musicians who want to find other people to play with. It's just so important to me. Like, we don't have to be best friends or anything like that, but people that you enjoy spending time with, it makes it so much more fun. And I think here's a big part of it too, is that when you're working in the arts, you're vulnerable as possible when you present a new idea. And knowing that you can walk into a room and have people who are going to be like, hell yeah, you got something new? Like, let's do it. And oh, this sounds great. And where they're enthusiastically taking up your ideas and turning them into reality it's priceless. And I was very fortunate to have that in San Francisco. And where my musicians would regularly be like, so you got anything new? Like, how's the new piece coming along? And they're always kind of, behind me, lighting a little fire of like, we're excited, we want to hear it. But not taking that for granted and trying to find new people who can fill that role and not, be in any way negative about it or just unenthusiastic. If you give somebody a new piece and you're like, I put my soul into this, I think this is the best thing I've ever written. And then they're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I've only got a half an hour, so let's just go through this. Like, that's it can be just so demoralizing at times. So whereas with a band, when you're in a band, there's a kind of like, we're in this together. Like, and you can throw ideas back and forth, and work is work. But the personal end of putting together an ensemble to me is the most difficult one. I think I would have had an ensemble years ago in Berlin had I just been willing to take whoever. So that being said, like finding the right people, it just takes time. But there's lots of cool people in Berlin. That's the other thing. Like someone who moves here to Berlin, it takes a certain type of person to move from a different country to a city like this.
Yeah.
And so I have not met I don't think I've met anybody who's closed-minded and just off-putting in a way where I'm like, what are you even doing here? Like you're just negative about everything. Everybody is pretty optimistic, enthusiastic, open-minded, willing to try new things, and they just want to go out there and get involved.
And just the concentration of talent, let's say, that you can find here in young people.
Yeah,
Like really young people.
absolutely.
It's kind of staggering. I think it's an interesting place to be, but just to have the courage to tap into that world, I think that's really what is great.
Right.
Like so. I'm really curious what you're gonna come up with there. And I mean, like we started working on some music together as well.
Oh yes, we did.
And I I wasn't sure when I only did the first recording session here in this very room that we're sitting in right now, and I was throwing all that stuff at you.
Just all kinds of stuff. And we had no plan. It was just I think we had shared a few words about like a vibe, but then we're like, no. I think the only thing that we decided upon from the get-go was that each piece would be relatively short. We weren't looking for big, extended, involved pieces of music, but more like flash in the pan. I remember taking, not as like musically what I want to do, but as an example of how effective numerous short pieces of music could be on a record, was the first Phantomas record.
Yeah.
Which I have a feeling your listeners know. Still, Phantomas is one of my favorite bands of all time. But that first record is just fucking incredible. But, just songs that are 47 seconds long or less, and you're just left wanting more, which is both good and bad. There's some where I'm like, bro, just repeat that one more time and that'd be good, you know? But I like that idea of just capturing some magical little spark. And so fast forward, and I looked through today, I think there's about 15 pieces that we have now that are in various stages of completion. And some are, you know, proper song length, like 3 to 4 minutes. I think there's one that's even longer. But then there's a bunch of them that are in the like 1 to 2 minute range as well. And I'm super excited about it. I think it's for a variety of reasons. First of all, it was the first time we've ever made anything together. We had absolutely no preconceived notions about what it should be. So it was like, okay, let's sit down. You know, I will just sit next to you while you record in your studio, and you play guitar. What guitar did you play? Do you remember? Was this?
I think I played the semi-acoustic, the AU8.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, occasionally I'd throw in, oh, maybe try this. Oh, do that again. You know, little things like that. But we just recorded maybe it was an hour of music or more.
Yeah, something like that.
It was a chunk.
Yeah, it was a big chunk. And I mean, I remember I recorded, like my mindset was to just give you very experimental,
Yeah.
treated stuff. And I think I remember recording on 8 tracks in parallel or something.
Something like
So
that.
there were like a variety of treatments that you could choose from the get-go without you even having to do any post-production.
It's really nice to be able to have a stack ready to go for it. Like if you like a particular part and suddenly you're like, well, there's like an infinite amount of variation just within this stack of, I think it's 4 tracks that you gave me in the end, 4 stereo tracks.
Yeah.
And you've got the clean, and then you've got various levels of effects depth that you explore, and you know you kind of give and take and push and pull these things. And yeah, I mean, the most difficult part about this is just sifting through that much audio and picking, like, because like we had talked about it before, I could write a whole record where it was the first 10 seconds of each thing that you came up with. But and sometimes that I've done that. But then there's other things where you really got to dig through and just trust your ear and be like, this is the most interesting. This is better than this. This works better than this. And what I've been trying to do is also to not just take a snippet and then just build something off. There's pieces that I do that. But there's some where I just take like fully formed, it's essentially like a song that you improvised. And you do, you know, minimal editing to it. And most of it is just kind of production. It's processing, doing a lot of like tape saturation and running everything through like busted old tape recorders and a lot of effects and kind of degrading the quality of what you're doing, but then creating these like large stacks of these tracks that are affected in various ways. And I mean, some of it is just gorgeous, you know, and it's so different from anything else I've done, both from the combination of our, you know, inputs, but also just like a full record that is essentially like, I would say it's 70% guitar, you know, at the moment.
Yeah, you know, I love the fact that when you played some of it back to me, that I had no idea which sound was coming from me or which
Yeah.
was like, and I don't even care in the most
Sure.
positive sense.
Exactly. Yeah.
You know, like,
And that's the thing, having it be where your track is here and I'm just recording something over the top of it is fine if it feels right. But I didn't want to do that. It was about, this is like this, throwing everything into a pot and mixing it and cooking it and burning it often and just making a total mess of it and then pouring it out and reforming it into something new. It's like, I'm often surprised myself by what is coming out the other end. And just today I was, you know, in anticipation of coming over, I went through and just looked through some of what we've done and was listening to some pieces. There's some fucking awesome stuff in there. So I think it's just almost finished. I think we just have to get it fully completed. I think like this summer it should be ready to go. Like we're getting
wonderful.
close.
That would be great.
Yeah. So we'll set a hard deadline soon, I think. I would like that.
Let's do that. Yes.
I had said to you, like I heard Brian Eno in an interview recently say that in his in his estimation, the best albums come from short deadlines and small budgets. And I fully believe that.
Yeah, I mean, to me that makes total sense. Yeah, I mean, it's again, I find it interesting that you have this interesting trajectory in your life where you have sort of like 20 years of not really being in music much, then you have your 20 years in the US being an active ensemble leader, composer.
Way more like 13 years.
Yeah, but you know what I mean. Just
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
not. I'm just talking about
Sure,
like
sure.
these chunks, and then like you move to Berlin, and something like you're challenging yourself to sort of like almost, yeah, forcing yourself to reinvent yourself, and it's I think it's great because like I'm realizing about myself that that's something that I sort of need also. I mean, I'm not saying that you chose to do it this way, but
Yeah, sure. Yeah. If it wasn't for the pandemic and San Francisco rental prices and Donald Trump and the wildfires in California, it was this perfect storm of awfulness that happened. I might still be in San Francisco and still playing with the same musicians and perfectly happy or whatever. But I mean, first of all, I always wanted to live in Berlin, and it was ultimately it was an excuse that we needed to just get ourselves to move, because I was going to move here in 2019. I actually got hired to write music for it was this incredible installation that was a very scientific thing. It was based on quantum mechanics, and it was a whole thing with a state studio that no longer exists because of the pandemic. But I got hired for it, and I was like, we're going to move in 2019, and that was like the end of 2019, and then here comes COVID, and that shut that down. But we were like at multiple times ready to jump ship and move to Berlin, and we just happened to have moved at, the worst time, like probably since the end of the World War II, to move to Berlin, where it was like we got here and there was nobody anywhere. But it was I think that it was a happy coincidence that I have been forced into shuffling my entire creative process, because I did find myself feeling that I was getting stale with my approach to composing and producing music in a live setting as well. And but when you have an established method of composing that you do enjoy, but that you've put years and years of work into, it's really difficult to suddenly chuck it all out the window and just go in a fully new direction, unless you have, like a well-funded outlet for it on the other side. Like having these side projects where you can try new ideas is great. But for me, I mean, I had years of pieces for my ensemble that I would continue to play, as well as new pieces. Excuse me. And to like completely throw that out the window to try something new was, I mean, just it's foolish, essentially, in San Francisco, and it just so much work. So then I come here, and it's like, oh, there are no people. You can't be in the same room as another human being in this new city that you went into, and it just forced me into like, okay, I'm gonna write for groups that I'm nowhere near, geographically, and I'm going to write music for machines that are in the room. And suddenly you're down a new path. And I also think, as we get older, your temperament changes. Like everything I've written up until basically I moved to Berlin was like high energy, percussive as hell, just really intense rhythms and like aggressive. It's like more of a youthful energy. Even I don't really think of it in terms of that, but I mean it's totally true. And but then I get here and I found myself making room for stillness
interesting.
and quiet, and I think I had always wanted. I'm like, I need more slow jams. Like the first record that I put out, I remember playing it to. So maybe your listeners know Carla Kilstead, who she was in Sleepy Time Gorilla Museum. She's a a literal genius, violinist, singer, composer. And I wrote a piece for her on my first record, Navigation Without Numbers. And I sent her the record when it was finished, and she listened to it, and I was like, "What'd you think?" And she's like, "This is really high energy," you know. And she meant it as a compliment, but she was saying, she's like, "There's no break. There's no point where it's suddenly
Relentless.
you know, yeah. There's no breath. It's just all just like all rise, you know." And so now I
So
find
would you say that that record is like the quintessential? It's the first record, you said it, right?
yeah. Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's not a good word to say quintessential, but you know what I mean. Like
I,
which record of the first half of your life, let's say, that you made?
I think that's the one I'm probably the most proud of.
Yeah.
Because it was you know a long time in the making, and it captures very much many of my interests all together in one record. And it's it's extremely, we recorded in phenomenal studios, and it was mixed by Mark Orton, he's a famous film composer. I think he's up for a Grammy, and I don't know if he won an Oscar yet. Anyways, like he did engineering for a long time, and him and I worked together for years. And he mixed the record, and it just sounded so great, and everything about it I just really love. So I think Navigation Without Numbers is the way to go. But since I moved to Berlin, I put out a piece on 7K Records called Silent Winter. It's on a compilation. Excuse me. It's on a compilation that they put out about just 2 years ago, and I'm extraordinarily proud of that piece because it is kind of the antithesis of the Navigation Without Numbers record, where it is this kind of formless, amorphous, floating type of music, but it is also very active and interesting. It was built on this bed of synthesizers and things like that. And I wrote in sections for flutes and cellos to be played on top of it, and then used a bunch of these recordings I had made with a choir years previously. And I'm just in love with the piece. I think I was very proud of the job that I did with that, both because I enjoyed writing it and listening to it, but because of how much of a departure from my other music it was. And for anybody who might listen to it, for how quiet and slow the music is comparatively, I wrote it in Chicago when I was visiting my family. And the only place in their house at the time that had a big enough space for me to set up all my gear was on my parents' between the kitchen and the living room. There's like a bar. And so it's like a big tabletop. So I borrowed a bunch of synths from a music friend of mine and had all my stuff set up. And so I'm just composing. But the thing is, my parents are older, they're conservative, and 10 feet, not even 10 feet, 6 feet away from where I was working, when my dad would be watching TV, it was on full blast because he's deaf, or not deaf, but he's doesn't have good hearing, and he watches Fox News
Oh,
obsessively. And so I'm like being like force fed conservative news. It was a nightmare. It was the worst possible situation to compose music to. And yet I was able to find my way through it. And you would never guess that this is the type of music that was produced to that environment. But so yeah, Silent Winter, I'm very happy with. I also put out a piece last year on Accidental Records called Nuremberg, which was originally meant for that echolocation project, but it's just for solo piano. And it's very much it sounds like music you found on an old tape in an attic somewhere, like dusty, like a lot of tape processing again. And but it was done on an out of tune piano, so I can't even really properly replicate it. I've tried doing it live, and I'm like, this shit's in tune. It doesn't sound right. Like it's not really in a key per se, you know. But anyways, like I'm very pleased with that because again, it's just a total departure from what I've done in the past. So. But yeah, I mean, I have the new echolocation record that I'm prepping for release. I think is like for people who listen to Navigation Without Numbers, very much feels like an evolution in that style that I've been writing in. And so, but yeah, those are solid places to start.
great. I mean, I think we should wrap it up
Yeah, I think so. What time?
because I have no idea how.
Oh, No, it's been an hour and 15 minutes.
Unbelievable, huh?
I would have said it was 30 at the most.
No, this is perfect.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I learned so much about you, and
Thanks, man.
yeah, and yeah, I encourage people to check out your music, and
And we'll let them know about our record. when it's
yes,
ready to
we
go.
certainly will.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much, man. This is really fun. I appreciate
Thank you, George.
it. All right, man. See ya.